My name is Lavra. The day I returned from the hospital was supposed to be a moment of fragile peace. After weeks of pain and vulnerability, after lying beneath the sharp lights of surgery and listening to doctors whisper about complications, I wanted nothing more than to step into the quiet comfort of my own home. My body still ached, every step sending a dull reminder of the knife that had cut me open. But I carried myself with as much dignity as I could muster. My small white house in Cleveland, Ohio greeted me with its peeling shutters and familiar creaks in the floorboards, and for a fleeting second I felt safe again. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, something felt wrong. My driveway, which should have held my black Ford Explorer, stood empty. I blinked hard, convincing myself I was hallucinating from the pain medication. Yet the cement stretched bare, mocking me with its silence. "Where's my car?" I asked the air, though I already knew who had the answer. Angela, my sister, emerged from the kitchen when I entered the house. Her blonde hair was perfectly ironed, her nails painted blood red. She leaned against the counter with the kind of smirk only siblings can wear when they believe they've gotten away with something. "Oh, that?" she said, her voice dripping casual malice. "You weren't using it anyway." Her words struck me harder than any scalpel. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to admit it was a sick joke. But she didn't, her lips curled higher, her eyes glittering with amusement, as if she had been waiting for this moment. The rage that boiled in my chest was almost unbearable, but I swallowed it down. I was too weak, too stitched together to throw myself at her the way I wanted. Instead, I retreated to my bedroom, trembling with fury. I told myself it was just a car, nothing more than steel and rubber, a replaceable object. I tried to believe that. But the truth has a way of clawing its way out. A week later, the mail came in a thick stack. I sifted through bills, advertisements, and hospital follow-up notes. Then I saw it a letter from a loan company I had never dealt with. My stomach dropped as I opened it. Inside was a notice of repayment, demanding thousands of dollars for an auto loan I had supposedly signed. My name sprawled across the bottom of the page in a shaky imitation of my handwriting. I tore through the rest of the mail, and each envelope was worse than the last. Credit cards, loans, agreements, all bearing my name, none of them mine. By the time I finished, my living room floor was littered with papers accusing me of debts, totaling more than $30,000. Angela's laugh echoed in my ears, and I realized the truth. My car was never just a car. It was the start of a theft so carefully disguised that she had thought I would never notice. I confronted her that evening. She sat in the living room with her boyfriend, Marcus, a smug man with slicked back hair and a shirt that screamed arrogance more than fashion. He glanced at me once and then returned to scrolling through his phone. "You forged my name," I said flatly, tossing the pile of documents onto the coffee table. The papers fanned out like blades. Angela didn't even flinch. "Don't be dramatic, Lavra. It's just paperwork. And it's not like you were going to do anything with that money anyway." The audacity of her words made my hands shake. I could feel my pulse in my temples, a steady drum of violence begging to be released. "You stole my car. You stole my name. You buried me in debt while I was lying in a hospital bed." Marcus finally looked up, his smirk almost identical to Angela's. "Relax. It's just money. You'll survive." Those words nearly pushed me over the edge. For a moment I imagined grabbing the glass ashtray from the side table and smashing it across his smug face. I imagined Angela's shrieks, her perfect hair tangled in my fists as I dragged her across the floor. The violence in me was alive, demanding release, but I held it back with every ounce of restraint I had. Instead, I told her, "You'll regret this. Both of you." Her smile faltered for the first time. Good, she needed to see the fire in me. She needed to understand that I wasn't the fragile little sister she thought I was. The following days were consumed by a storm of paperwork and fury. I dug through every account, every signature, every forged document. The deeper I went, the more I realized how extensive their betrayal was. Angela and Marcus hadn't just taken my car, they had taken pieces of my identity, turning my name into a puppet for their greed. At night, when the house grew quiet, I lay awake plotting. Revenge tasted metallic in my mouth, sharp and intoxicating. I imagined their downfall in exquisite detail. Angela's tears on the witness stand, Marcus handcuffed and dragged away. But imagination wasn't enough. I wanted action. 2 weeks later, I marched into a lawyer's office in downtown Cleveland. My body still hurt from the surgery, but my determination made me walk taller than I had in months. The lawyer, a stern woman named Rebecca Carter, listened as I laid out the evidence. She tapped her pen against her desk, her eyes narrowing at the signatures. "This is fraud," she said finally. "Blatant fraud. You need to file a cease and desist immediately." Hearing those words was like gasoline to my fire. That same day I drafted the documents, my hand shaking not with fear but with unrestrained rage. I sent them off, each envelope sealed like a bullet. When Angela opened her copy, she screamed at me from across the house, her voice breaking through the walls. "You think you can threaten me? You think you can ruin us?" I stepped out of my bedroom, standing tall despite the ache in my body. "I don't think," I said. "I know." Her face twisted with anger, Marcus hovering behind her like a shadow ready to strike. But for the first time I wasn't afraid. For the first time I had chosen war. And war was exactly what they were going to get. The house was no longer mine, not truly. Its walls, once a sanctuary for my recovery and solitude, had become saturated with betrayal. Every creak of the floorboards whispered of theft. Every room reeked of Angela's perfume and Marcus's arrogance. It was as though the house itself had turned against me, siding with the enemy who now lounged in my kitchen and laughed in my living room, as though they had earned the right to occupy my space. At night, I lay awake listening to their laughter. Angela's shrill giggles, Marcus's smug baritone, each note was like a hammer striking my skull. Sometimes I heard glasses clink. Sometimes I caught the sound of a wine bottle uncorking. They celebrated in the heart of my home, feeding themselves on my air, their shadows stretching across walls that no longer felt like mine. I clenched my fists under the sheets until my fingernails dug crescents into my palms, fantasizing about how easily I could silence that laughter. Marcus strutted around the house like a king surveying his kingdom. His arrogance was unbearable. He would lean against the doorframe of the living room, his arm draped around Angela as though the two of them owned me, my life, my future. He wore a brand new silver watch that glistened beneath the dim ceiling lights. A watch worth more than $5,000. And that was when I knew. He worked at a bank in Detroit, Michigan, and the money he flaunted, the shiny trinkets, the dinners out, the expensive suits, it all traced back to my name. I began digging, obsessively tracing every forged loan and fraudulent signature. The deeper I looked, the more the numbers piled up, suffocating me in their enormity. It wasn't just a few thousand here or there. They had stolen nearly $68,000 from me. $68,000 stolen while I was lying in a hospital bed, my body sliced open, my mind clinging to life. It was enough to bury me in debt for years, to ruin my credit, to strangle my freedom. The discovery lit a fire inside me that burned hotter than any pain I'd endured from surgery. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear Angela's perfect hair from her smug head, to smash Marcus's expensive watch against the edge of the counter until it shattered into useless shards. But I knew better than to waste my energy on chaos. Their kind thrived on screaming matches. They thrived on messy confrontations where the truth could be twisted, rewritten, buried under false tears and smug retorts. No, my revenge would not come through wild outbursts. It would come in silence, in the sharp edge of planning, in the cold patience of someone who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. I began with their patterns. Marcus left early for work each morning, leaving Angela behind in the house. She wandered the kitchen in her robe, sipping coffee she'd brewed with beans I bought. Milk I paid for, utilities still under my name. She had no shame. I started leaving earlier myself, parking down the street and watching from the shadows, noting when she came and went. She wasn't just lazy, she was reckless. She often left the front door unlocked, assuming no one would dare cross her. One evening, when the house was quiet and their bedroom door was shut, I crept into the living room and searched through Angela's purse. Inside, I found receipts, expensive dinners in Chicago, shopping trips to high-end boutiques, jewelry purchases in cash. My blood boiled as I realized every cent had been paid for with my ruined credit. I tucked the receipts into my notebook, building a file of evidence, each slip of paper another nail in their coffin. Still, anger gnawed at me, begging to be released. One night, unable to restrain myself, I stormed into the kitchen where Angela sat perched on the counter, sipping a glass of red wine. She looked up at me lazily, her robe slipping from her shoulder as though she owned seduction itself. "You think you're clever," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut. "But I know everything. Every forged loan, every dollar you and Marcus stole. You've poisoned this house, Angela." She tilted her head and laughed, the sound like nails dragged across glass. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're weak. You've always been weak." That's why I had to take charge. My vision blurred red. I wanted to grab the wineglass from her hand and smash it against her face, watch the stem splinter into her perfect skin. Instead, I leaned closer, lowering my voice into a deadly whisper. "You're not in charge. You've just written your own obituary." For the first time, her smile faltered. I saw fear flash across her eyes, quickly masked by bravado, but I had seen it. And that small crack in her armor fueled me more than any violent outburst could. That night, I sat at my desk under the weak glow of a lamp, my notebook open before me. Page after page filled with evidence, receipts, forged documents, loan notices, observations. I wrote with aggression, pressing the pen so hard the paper tore beneath it. Each word was a weapon, each detail another step closer to their downfall. But revenge is more than paperwork. Revenge requires strategy. And so I began crafting scenarios in my mind, aggressive visions of what I would do when the time was right. Sometimes I imagined burning their clothes while they slept, the smoke waking them into panic. Other times I pictured pouring bleach into Angela's precious wine bottles, watching her choke on the bitterness. But the most satisfying fantasy was the courtroom, the day their smug smiles would collapse under the weight of undeniable evidence, the day the law would strip them of their stolen luxuries and leave them exposed as the criminals they were. In those fantasies, I didn't smile, I didn't laugh, I didn't even speak. I simply stood tall while they crumbled. Silence could be the loudest form of revenge, and I intended to wield it like a blade. The house was no longer mine. It had become a battlefield, each room soaked in unspoken war. But I was no longer the fragile woman returning home from surgery, afraid and broken. I was fire contained in flesh, sharpened by betrayal, fueled by rage. Angela thought she had won. Marcus thought his watch and his money made him untouchable. They believed they had stolen not just my car and my credit, but my power. They were wrong. I was waiting, planning, watching. And soon, very soon, they would learn what it meant to steal from someone who had nothing left to lose. I had never been a woman of wealth. What I owned carried more memory than value. A few antique chairs passed down from my grandmother, a cracked dresser that had traveled with me through 3 cities, and a box of jewelry, tarnished but cherished. Yet I sold them all. Each item exchanged for cash was another piece of my old life burned away, another step toward the war I had decided to wage. When the pawnbroker slid $3,200 across the counter in worn bills, I felt my rage ignite into purpose. It wasn't much, not compared to the $68,000 they had stolen. But it was enough to buy a weapon of my own. And my weapon came in the form of a woman named Rebecca Carter, a lawyer in Chicago, Illinois, with a reputation for cutting down liars like they were weeds choking a garden. Rebecca was blunt from the first meeting. Her office smelled of leather and coffee, her desk stacked with files of ruined marriages and corporate fraud. She flipped through my notebook page after page of forged signatures, receipts, addresses, dates, and her lips curled into something between a smirk and a grimace. "This will get ugly," she said, her pen tapping the desk like a judge's gavel. "Family never forgives when money's involved. You need to be ready for that." Ugly, that word sang in my veins like a hymn. I was ready. Ugly was exactly what I wanted. When I returned home that evening, the air in the house was thick with the stench of Marcus's cologne and Angela's wine. They were waiting for me in the living room, like predators guarding stolen prey. Marcus leaned against the armrest of the couch, his watch glinting under the light, while Angela perched beside him with her legs crossed, her lips painted crimson. "You've been busy," Marcus said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Lawyers, paperwork. Don't waste your money, Lavra. It's just money. That phrase, just money, was gasoline on my fire. My chest tightened with fury, my fists clenched so hard my nails cut into my palms. I stepped closer, my voice low but deadly. You stole my car, you stole my name. But you won't steal my future. For the first time, Marcus faltered. His smirk twitched, as if my words had sliced through his armor. Angela laughed to cover it, but her laughter was brittle, cracked at the edges. That night I sat at my desk, the old leather notebook open in front of me. My hand moved furiously across the paper, recording everything: the time Marcus came home from work, the brand of wine Angela favored, the phone calls they tried to make when they thought I wasn't listening. Each entry was written with such aggression that the ink sometimes bled through the page. It wasn't just a notebook anymore. It was a weapon. And I intended to wield it with precision. Still, rage demanded more than ink. Rage demanded presence. One evening, Marcus cornered me in the kitchen. His face was inches from mine, his breath hot with arrogance. You think Rebecca Carter is going to save you? You think a few scraps of paper are going to undo us? Wake up, Lavra, we own you now. My jaw tightened. I imagined shoving the knife from the counter into his chest, watching the smugness drain from his eyes. I could almost feel the warmth of his blood on my hands. But violence in that moment would have been satisfaction without victory. No, I wanted more than a body on the floor. I wanted ruin. I wanted collapse. So I leaned in, whispering, "When you fall, Marcus, it won't be quick. It'll be slow. And I'll be watching every second of it." He pulled back, unsettled, though he tried to mask it with a scoff. But I saw it, the flicker of doubt. He wasn't invincible. Neither was Angela. Rebecca and I worked in secret. She filed complaints, drafted letters, and began tearing apart every bank record we could reach. Each forged signature became a noose tightening around Angela's pretty little neck. Each sudden purchase became a spotlight on Marcus's greed. But as the legal wheels turned, my aggression only grew sharper. I began planting seeds in the house itself, subtle acts of war to remind them they were living on borrowed ground. Angela's favorite perfume bottle shattered one morning, the glass scattered like daggers across the bathroom floor. Marcus's car keys went missing for 2 days, only to be found in the freezer. Small things, petty things. But each one made them nervous, unsettled, looking over their shoulders. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silence that eats people alive. Late at night, I walked the halls of the house with my notebook in hand, whispering to myself, rehearsing the day they would break. I pictured Angela in court, her perfect face streaked with tears, her voice trembling as the judge read out her crimes. I pictured Marcus stripped of his arrogance, his watch gone, his suits pawned, his name ruined. Those images kept me alive, kept me burning. But the aggression inside me wasn't satisfied with waiting. It pushed at my ribs, urging me to act, to strike harder. So one evening, while Angela and Marcus were gone, I rifled through their bedroom. What I found was better than I could have hoped. In the top drawer of Marcus's nightstand lay a folder filled with even more incriminating evidence: bank transfers, credit card statements, even a second set of forged documents they hadn't yet used. My hands trembled as I flipped through them, not with fear but with excitement. It was all there. Proof enough to destroy them both. When they came home that night, I greeted them with a smile sharper than glass. Angela noticed immediately, narrowing her eyes. "What are you smiling about?" she demanded. I leaned back in the chair, folding my hands calmly. "Just thinking about the future," I said. "Yours looks short." Her face twisted, but she didn't reply. Marcus muttered something under his breath, but the tension in the room told me everything I needed to know. The war had shifted. The balance of power was no longer theirs. I went to bed with fire in my veins, the notebook at my side, and dreams of their collapse circling my mind like vultures over prey. They thought they had stolen everything from me: my car, my name, my freedom. But what they had really given me was purpose, and I was going to use it to burn their world to the ground. The courthouse in New York City loomed above me like a stone fortress, cold and indifferent. Its steps were wide, its doors heavy, as though daring me to enter, but I did. I walked in with my head high, the winter wind biting at my face, my notebook clutched against my chest like a shield. I had been waiting for this day, feeding on the anticipation, nursing my rage until it was sharp enough to cut steel. Angela and Marcus were already inside when I entered the courtroom. Angela wore a cream-colored blouse, her makeup flawless, her hair styled into the kind of perfection that made strangers believe in innocence. But I knew her better. Beneath the surface, she was a viper in silk, and I was ready to crush her under my heel. Marcus sat beside her, his suit tailored, his watch gleaming under the overhead lights, as if he still believed money could buy him untouchable status. His smirk told me he thought this would be easy. Let him smirk. It would make his collapse all the more satisfying. Rebecca stood beside me, her expression calm, sharp, professional, but I saw the fire in her eyes. She had studied every detail of the case, memorized every forged signature, every unexplained bank transfer. She wasn't just my lawyer. She was my blade. When the trial began, Marcus leaned back in his chair like a man who had nothing to fear. Angela dabbed at her eyes as though tears might win her sympathy. She played her part beautifully broken sister, overwhelmed by responsibility, caught in unfortunate circumstances. It might have worked on strangers. But not on Rebecca, not on me. The first piece of evidence was the forged car loan. Rebecca projected the documents across the courtroom. My name scrawled in a clumsy imitation, the car registration tied directly to Marcus's address. My client was in surgery, Rebecca said, her voice steady and clear. Sedated, unconscious, unable to even hold a pen, let alone sign a loan agreement. Yet here her signature appears. A signature tied directly to a vehicle Marcus Parker registered to himself 3 days later. The judge's eyes narrowed. Angela shifted in her seat. Marcus stopped smirking. I sat there, silent but seething, my fists clenched in my lap. Every word Rebecca spoke was a strike of the hammer. Every document displayed a nail driven into their coffin. Angela tried to take the stand. She wept, her voice trembling as she claimed she only did what she thought was best for me. Lavra was weak, she sniffled, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She couldn't handle the bills. I was trying to help. My body trembled with fury. Help? She had drained me dry, strangling me with debt, mocked me as she poured wine in my kitchen. I wanted to leap across the room and tear the mask from her face, but I stayed rooted, nails biting into my palms. Rebecca cut her apart with precision. Help, Miss Peterson? By signing $68,000 in loans under your sister's name without her knowledge? By transferring thousands into your boyfriend's account? By registering her car to him instead of her? She held up the receipts I had gathered, the statements from Marcus's nightstand. This isn't help. This is theft. This is fraud. Angela's sobs faltered. She shifted, stammered, looked to Marcus for rescue, but Marcus couldn't save her. He was drowning too. When he took the stand, his arrogance cracked like glass under pressure. He denied everything at first, denied the watch, denied the purchases, denied the transfers. But then Rebecca brought out the statements, one by one, each bearing his name, each signed in his hand. His face paled as the numbers piled against him, the trail of greed undeniable. Mr. Parker, Rebecca said, her tone slicing the air, do you expect this court to believe that your sudden acquisition of luxury watches, expensive suits, and cash withdrawals were unrelated to the loans fraudulently taken under Lavra Peterson's name? He tried to sneer, to brush it off, but his voice cracked. And in that crack, I saw everything I had been waiting for. Their collapse wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scream or a sudden breakdown, it was slower, uglier. Angela's tears became frantic, messy, her mascara bleeding down her cheeks. Marcus's smirk dissolved into silence, his eyes darting desperately around the room. They weren't untouchable anymore. They weren't predators. They were prey, cornered and helpless. When the judge delivered the verdict, the sound of the gavel struck like thunder. Angela Peterson and Marcus Parker are hereby found guilty of fraud and ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $72,000 to the plaintiff, Lavra Peterson. Further, this court recommends the filing of criminal charges against both parties for identity theft and fraud. The words rang in my ears, each one a victory. My sister turned toward me, her face twisted, her mouth opening in silent protest. Marcus slammed his hand against the table in rage, but their fury was nothing compared to mine. Mine was sharpened, unleashed, victorious. I rose from my seat, every step measured, deliberate. I didn't smile. Smiling would have cheapened the moment. Instead, I looked at them with the coldness of a storm. You should have killed me when you had the chance, I whispered as I passed them. Because now I'll never stop watching you fall. Their eyes widened, fear finally breaking through their bravado. It was better than any scream. Outside, the New York winter wrapped around me like ice, but I felt nothing but heat inside. My breath rose in sharp clouds, my pulse steady, my rage finally satiated. People passed by, bundled in coats, rushing through their own lives, oblivious to the war I had just won. Revenge wasn't sweet. It wasn't a gentle victory or a storybook ending. It was bitter, raw, burning, but it was mine. I had lost a sister, I had lost a car. I had lost months of peace to betrayal and rage. But what I had gained was far more valuable: power. The kind of power that comes from surviving the fire, from standing against the collapse and watching your enemies crumble. My name was no longer just Lavra, my name was survival, my name was vengeance. And I intended to carry it for the rest of my life.